Good morning. Morning. Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here, and I have a lot of respect for the university and the association, and really appreciate the opportunity. So as a little bit of street cred, so my background is in retail marketing technology. We started our first company. My brother's my partner and my CTO in most of my firms, and if you ever scan a loyalty card and get a really long receipt that tracks your purchase behavior and makes offers based on your current or previous purchase history, we actually invented that in 1998. And then I was a firm called Copient that we sold to NCR, and so NCR actually became my real first sort of education in retail, and what a great experience that was. And then I served as Chief Development Officer and Head of M&A at a company called Catalina Marketing, if you've ever gotten the coupons at the receipt at Target or Safeway. So long background in big data and retail marketing tech. So Marxent is our most recent firm. We're coming up on 5 years old, and we're one of the very early innovators in augmented and virtual reality, and are very, very specific. A lot of the interest in AR and VR, the headsets, or to be able to project digital content into physical space, is built in and around gaming. But because of our very specific background, when the technology started to emerge, we jumped on it and said, we know there's going to be applications for manufacturers and for retailers, and so that's where we've spent our time. So over the last 5 years, we've made a lot of mistakes. The technology has matured dramatically. We've had some great partnerships. I'm going to share one of them with you today with Lowe's, if you've heard of the Hollow Room. We're the platform behind the Hollow Room. And so the focus of my talk today is, how to future-proof an investment in AR and VR. I mean, it's such a early market. Hardware is still developing. Platforms are still developing. Use cases are still developing. How do you start to invest in this emerging technology and not feel like that you're throwing away the investment? So let's start there. So we got a clicker. All right, so this is, it's only been, sort of in the news for the last year or so, but the Lowe's Hollow Room actually started almost 3 years ago in Canada. That was before the Oculus Rift existed. That was before any of the headsets existed. That's before many of the platforms existed. And what we were partnering with on Lowe's in a group called their Innovation Labs, which is a great team run by a guy named Kyle Nell, who's a PhD in neuroscience, by the way, which is pretty interesting. So he has a very interesting perspective on how to innovate. So the vision for the Lowe's Hollow Room was, you've got 10,000 square feet in the store that you've committed to a showroom. Most of those showrooms are dated. They're very expensive to update. And they're not very dynamic. So if you're a manufacturer like an American Woodmark in partnership with Lowe's and you want to be able to update that visual merchandising, it's very hard to do with physical assets. So the question was, how do we make the most of that square footage? And at the same time, if you've ever designed a kitchen or bathroom, which I assume most of us have at some point, if you go into a Lowe's, you'll sit down with a professional service contractor, and they'll be behind a PC, and you'll have pictures and photos and ideas and drawings. And that could be a 2 or 3 hour process, and sometimes it can be a couple of trips. And so as a function of that, it would take people upwards of 14 months to make their first major purchase on a kitchen or a bathroom, less than that on a bathroom. But so how do we make that more inviting and get people who are still in the very early parts of the consideration stage, I'm thinking about it, engaged? And so the solution was, okay, first, we need to turn the use case back towards the consumer and give them an application that they can use. And obviously, designing a kitchen can be complex, so we challenged ourselves, how do we do that on an iPad, which was pervasive. And so we had three, my brother in particular, have a background in video gaming, and so there are three components to creating a really great user experience that we used to guide the design of the experience, which was control, competency, and community, which is make sure they feel like they're in control. And so instead of a right-click, drop-down kind of experience, you're literally taking 3D models, 3D representations of refrigerators and cabinets and flooring, and just dragging them into a scene and dropping them into your environment. So this idea of very simple controls to be able to create your environments. The other thing that was important to us was competency. And so, especially with a new application like this, and you have a demographic that may or may not be comfortable with this kind of experience, you needed to make them feel good at it, like right away. And so the idea was, how do you create sort of template rooms that are effectively pre-built or 80% of the way there, so all the consumer is doing is having to sort of do some small modifications and sort of making it their own. And then the third part of it was community, which was really simple. As soon as they create their designs, give them a tool to actually share that on their social networks, which is sort of a virtuous loop back to feeling good about the experience. So those are the 3 C's that sort of guide all of our experiences. Just as an aside, we do other things like you want to build a deck on the back of your house. We can do that on an iPad. You hold up your iPad and we build a $50,000 virtual deck on the back of your house. And so very, very similar use cases and lots of, if you're a manufacturer, there are opportunities outside the store as well. So once you design your kitchen on an iPad, you have some opportunities to share. One is like creating this YouTube 360 video. So you've seen these panoramic videos that we're all using now. It's a quick way to share it. But the big sell is now I want to create this experiential, fantastic opportunity in the store for the consumer. So now they can come into the store and sit in the holo room, and you'll notice the holo room. Imagine this in a Lowe's. This is a 20-foot diameter, 20-foot tall experience. I mean, and you could feel the weight of it. The idea was, how do you make this like a very exciting, lots went into the design to sort of make it feel like, kind of a hardware store environment that was also crossed with sort of a science fiction feel. Even the enclosure, I mean, the whole use case is really just the headset, but creating an environment that people wanted to go into and stand in line for. So it has this sort of science fiction, industrial, even the glass enclosure with sort of the etched glass was designed to give people a sense of privacy, but also give visibility to walkers by so they would want to participate. And we learned a ton about, will people do this? Even things like, why don't you want to do it? I don't want to mess up my hair. Like very simple, basic inhibitors that we had to overcome. So there's a lot done in the stores around signage and to show other people in the engagement, sort of that social proof concept. The pre-roll videos that people experience to encourage them to participate were also a big part of our learning. So let's play a video here, and it's about a minute-long video that shows you the consumer journey from beginning to end. This is pretty cool. One of the very interesting things we learned about the user when they're actually in the environment is that you guys have seen the movie, what's the Tom Cruise movie, Minority Report? But that's kind of everybody's used it in the presentation on AR and VR. But when you see Tom Cruise, he's got his hands up like this, and he's doing all these actions. If you do that for like a minute, you're done. Your arms are like tired. So even learning that composition, where does composition take place? The composition takes place on your lap, at home. You could do 3 hours at a time, do multiple projects, but people wanted to design in sort of a heads-down environment, but then view in a heads-up environment. But they still wanted some set of functionality still available when they were in the headset. And so we had to figure out, what that was. So for instance, I might build the kitchen cabinets in a heads-down environment, but I want to change the floor and the wall color and maybe the countertops in the experience. We also had to create the ability to do like a picture-in-picture, so the sales associate could see in a window what the user was doing, and at the same time the sales associate could make suggestions, so it's kind of a multiplayer game concept, and that was pretty fun to event. But here's the biggest takeaway is how fun can you make it? Opening and closing the refrigerator, moving things. People, that dopamine that was released when they got to play around with it and look inside, and even you saw how cool it was when they looked out the windows and you actually got to see the outside. So we have that program to change based on the season of the year, so it'll snow outside if you're there during the holidays. So all these sort of, experiential. We also have music available as well to kind of put you in the mood and put you in the environment. So pretty neat experience. So we made every mistake you can make in the last 3 years in developing the solution. We feel like we're on a good path now. So I wanted to share some of that with you, and as you all go down through your augmented and virtual reality experience, that you can take advantage of it. So I'm going to start with, so how many people have ever heard of Unity? All right, when I do that in like a year, it'll be everybody. So Unity is a game development platform. So and there's another one called Unreal, which is the major competitor. There we go. So if you go, one of the interesting things about creating something in augmented and virtual reality is you have to program back in how things should act in virtual reality. For instance, in the Lowe's example, a refrigerator should attach to a floor and a wall, but not a ceiling. And a ceiling fan attaches to a wall, but not a floor. And so what the Unity game engine allows you to do is create gravity and physics and speed and light, all the things that you would imagine in like a first-player, video game. And so, interestingly, the Unity platform is going to become a major retail platform. It'll jump from gaming into retail, and it'll be a technology and a solution that you all need to become very familiar with to be successful in this space. And if you want to find somebody that's a Unity developer, it's going to be tough work. So if you post your first job, they won't be banging down the doors because they're all employed. They're all $150,000 plus resources, and for our company, we have to train them. So we get people right out of school, and we basically have a garden where we grow Unity developers. So it's a talent that you're going to have to. If all the kids that are in the back still in school, go learn Unity. You'll make a ton of money in your career, and it's going to be a major retail platform. So the second thing about Unity is you develop these experiences. All of that I'll talk about in a little bit when I talk about headsets, but whether it's the HoloLens or Oculus or HTC Vive or iPad applications, you can't have a different programming language for each one of those use cases. And right now, Unity seems to be the platform that everybody is adopting. So what that means is you develop your solutions, it'll be portable across different types of devices and experiences. So read up on Unity. That's the first tip, how to future-proof your platform. All right, so 3D, so you guys all, Minecraft, everybody's got kids with Minecraft? Okay, so Minecraft, if you don't know Minecraft is this game where you can go in and you have these little 8-bit 3D models that are, represent sort of blocks of terrain that you can build these great universes in. And so the visuals in Minecraft are as low quality as you can possibly get. But what they give you is incredible speed. So I can build, huge buildings and huge mountains with all kinds of features and functionality incredibly fast because the 3D model is an 8-bit 3D model. So the core element of building these AR and VR experiences are creating 3D model representations of your products. So for Lowe's, thousands and thousands of, refrigerators, floors, lamps. And when you put these 3D models into an environment, like a cloud environment that will eventually feed the end user application, like the Lowe's HoloRoom, you need to think about the nature of these 3D models. So in a game environment, if you build a great big monster for a game, and it has all the geometry, which is the volume or the shape of the object, and then you have the textures and the finishes and lighting. In a game world, that's what's called monolithic model. Everything is attached to that model and then gets sit down into the game experience. Well, imagine in retail, you've got thousands of products that are changing out all the time. If you create those models, which could be 2, 3, 4 megs at a time, there's no way you're going to get them, thousands of models from a cloud environment down to an iPad or an Oculus. So 3D modeling for retail, for AR and VR, has to completely change. And so first one is versioning. So you'll have really, really high-end models of, let's say, like a lamp that might go on a nightstand that would be used for rendering a final scene. But you'll have a separate model of that same lamp that might be for visualization on an iPad. So the Oculus, you could do a high render, and an iPad, you would do a lower base render. So the first is, don't think of 3D models. I create a 3D model and I'm ready to go. You're going to have multiple versions. The second thing about creating 3D models for an AR and VR environment is that they need to be deconstructed into their component parts. So you want to create reuse. So let's say you have a nickel finish on a lamp, or a stainless steel finish, or a cherry finish on a cabinet. You can't have those all associated with that 3D model because you won't get any use out of it. So as you build the platform, what you want to do is you want to have one file with your cherry finish, one file with your nickel finish, one file with your stainless steel finish, and then have geometries of your objects in a separate file, and then they get applied dynamically. Otherwise, it'll just be a behemoth database. So you've got to figure out reuse. And then when you get to communicating them, you'll need to be able to cache some of those finishes and textures locally to apply them. So the big one is versioning, and the second one is thinking of your products as pieces of products that can be constructed to build other products. So for instance, if like kitchen cabinets is a great example, you don't want to build 5,000 kitchen cabinets. You just want to build a texture, the router, and the finish, and then programmatically create all the different shapes. And so the process I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of 3D modeling in a second, but the whole world of 3D modeling has to change to be applicable for retail. The game model doesn't work. All right. So how do you get all the models in the tub is the theme of this one. So now imagine you've got 100,000 SKUs. How do you get them all in the system efficiently? And so, and how do you start? What's that process and what's that workflow and what's that methodology? Well, the traditional world of modeling is like called sculpting, where you take sort of a block, if you will, and like a sculptor, you sort of chisel it out. And that's a very manual. Some of the greatest visuals you'll ever see in the movie Avatar, they all kind of get built that way. But you can't do that at scale. And so modeling will require you to build a workflow and a process that there's a technology called blue light scanning, where I can take this scanner and take a lamp and go over a lamp, and I can just scan it, and it creates a geometry, and then I can apply the textures and finishes. So that's a way to accelerate. Programmatically creating the models like the kitchen cabinet example. But the real, and it's still a relatively expensive process, but what's happening is you also need to take a look at R&D and what are the other methodologies of bringing modeling on board. So the most promising is a combination of like lasers and photogrammetry, where I could take a lamp and I can put it on the table. Lasers can build the geometry around the object, and then photogrammetry can take photos of it, and then laying skin over a skeleton, put the photos and the finish over top of the model. We're probably about 3 years away from like camera arrays, where I could put that lamp and I can hit a switch, and it takes a three-dimensional image of that object, and I can immediately upload it. At that point, 3D modeling is going to become very commoditized, and a number of categories in retail and manufacturing are going to be accessible to AR and VR. Today, where we find the greatest amount of demand because of the cost of getting models in the pool is really high-end products like a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 kitchen, a $50,000 deck, industrial equipment, where it's worth the cost of building these objects. But finding out what your workflow is going to be, what technology you're going to use that suits your products, and how to do it efficiently, and what's your expectation over 3 years in terms of that over cost. Because today it's going to be more expensive than you want it to be. In 3 years it'll be commoditized and you'll be on your way. All right, so what you want to do is also make sure that your workflow is suitable to lots of different use cases. So I'll give you an example in Lowe's. So even though we talk about AR and VR and that gets like all the headlines, in reality 3D models are going to be used across your organization. So, putting objects in headsets with the VR, projecting them in the physical space with AR, but 3D models are also going to be used for things like 3D printing. 3D models are also going to be used for e-commerce. We're 3 years away or less from when you shop at, Zappos.com, you'll have a photo and you'll have a video and you'll have a little image there that'll say 3D. You'll hit that and you'll hold the shoe in your hand. And you'll be able to, rotate it and manipulate it in your hand. And so this investment that you might make in AR and VR for an in-home or in-store experience are going to dramatically impact what e-commerce feels like. In every single product category, you'll just expect to be able to project it and visualize that object in space. And so as you think about that investment in 3D models and building that pool, don't just assign that cost to an AR or a VR experience in store, because it'll also impact your e-commerce strategy. The other reason, or the other application, is what's called object recognition. So this is a big new developing space, sort of tangentially related to AR and VR, and that is, we're not too far away from you being able to take your cell phone and recognize objects. It's kind of the next version of the QR code or the barcode. And so when you see an object, so it could be used for like pick and pack, for accelerating logistics. It could be used in customer recognition, but we're not very far away from or it could be used by store managers to recognize objects and get additional information. It could be used for data assets. And so our cameras are going to be able to recognize physical objects not very long away. But the precursor to that is that object's got to be in a database somewhere for it to recognize. And so as you build this 3D model asset, it'll also support object recognition. So hardware is the theme of this one. So I mentioned before you have Oculus and HoloLens and HTC Vive and iOS, and sure Apple's coming out with a headset and all sorts of Android headsets. You need to look. We get a lot of questions from people who say, hey, I want to do a project with Oculus. And the hardware decision will be your least important decision. Your biggest decision will be how are you going to onboard and manage all the content for these experiences. So you don't want to get locked into a specific hardware device, and then just view your platform as device agnostic. And what I think you'll find is once you get into a solution, you'll use these devices in combination. So for instance, Lowe's uses an iPad for composition that can be published to a YouTube panoramic video that gets communicated down for an Oculus experience that can also be ported to a Google Cardboard for a take-home promotional experience. So there are 4 different AR, VR platforms that are used in one solution. So when we start transitioning from devices into solutions, I think you'll see them in a much broader context. And then the idea here is that, make sure you have, one power outlet that's feeding a lot of different infrastructure. So content management systems that are open and can feed multiple user experiences. And the main takeaway I want you to have here is think of your process of building all the content that you might use in an AR experience as a completely different, separate discussion than what is a final use case. And because the biggest cost or the biggest investment you will make will be developing and onboarding this content and making sure it's evergreen. And to that point, that when we come back to how do you future-proof your investment, is think about building a content database that can be repurposed. So I want to leave you with one last thought, and then just a provocative thought, and then take some questions from you all. So it's hard to imagine now, but in 5 or 6 years, we'll be spending a lot of time in headsets. Whether it's travel or looking at real estate, there'll be all sorts of entertainment experiences. social, the idea of like not even having to go out of your home for a social experience, hanging out with your friends. We will, effectively what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years is we will recreate all real environments as a virtual environment. And it'll be a big part. It'll start to consume all of our TV viewing time and web-based time. So in that world, when that happens, how do you advertise? Right? It won't be Google AdWords anymore, right, as you're searching Google. So what is the ad unit when we're all sitting around with headsets on? And the answer is product placement, which means what we're all leading up to here is that, if I could find a beautiful, let's say I'm in Italy, and I'm traveling, and I'm walking through a beautiful building, and I'm looking at the interior, and there are lamps and tables and chairs, and there's a beautiful rug on the ground. And I look at it, and when I look at it with my headset, it catches my gaze, and it says, available at Macy's. That will be the new ad unit of VR. Thank you. Questions? Just yell at me.
So I'll address the obvious. Are we all going to become antisocial humans with these on? I mean, how do you create the virtual? How do you create the virtual experience where we still are a social community? Because one of the reasons bricks and mortar has continued to, frankly, outpace e-commerce dramatically is the fact that people like the social aspect of shopping. They like to be together. They like to compare with each other and have that personalized experience. And so the question becomes, if we all in 5 years are doing this, is it still a social experience? Will it be satisfying enough for the individual? How do you think you'll modify what you're doing to bring that in as well?
I have no idea. I think the argument is not my argument, is that it could become obviously more social. You could be shopping with people that are friends and family from across the country and have a much more sort of intimate experience. I always have this funny thing about like guys versus girls in the shopping experience. I always tease my wife about this. Like when guys go play basketball, we don't have to know each other at all, right? We could be 10 guys who've never met each other, and you give us 15 minutes, and we're slapping each other on the butt and giving high fives, right? And I always sort of imagine that with the shopping experience, is that doesn't really happen, right? And so maybe this makes that happen, where it's like friends and family, and it's a much more close experience. So.
Beck, when online retailing started to take off, one of the dilemmas that many retailers face is, do we create a library of product imagery for our websites? Mm-hmm. And some companies that were entrepreneurial sprung up and created master libraries of product imagery to save companies from the immense chore of creating their own imagery. And that's still an either-or choice today, depending on the kind of merchandising you do online. So do you foresee a similar circumstance for 3D product models? Is there going to be an incumbency on companies to create their own individual libraries for each retailer for their purposes? Or do you think there'll be some suppliers out there? And do you want to get into business doing that with me?
Yeah, so I think, so photography, what I would call in-context photography, where it's, I think obviously that's going to stay, but actual product shots will be completely replaced by 3D, largely because you can, it's less, once you have the asset, it's incredibly inexpensive to manipulate the asset, to do an exploded view, to change the lighting to suit your needs. So 3D models will ultimately, and already are starting to replace, you look at Kohler, if you go to their website, none of those, images are actually images, they're 3D models. So yeah, I think there'll be a whole plethora of companies that pop up to try to help people onboard their content, for sure. More questions?
I wonder if there's a hybrid between virtual and real, that if I wanted to shop the Fendi flagship in Milan, or I wanted to go to Colette in Paris, do you see maybe a hybrid opportunity here between real physical places and truly virtual places that somehow come together and let me go to or shop places that maybe I can't go to or never could get to?
No, I think that's an incredible use case. The ability to shop some exclusive, shop in Milan that you could never get to, and actually, to go back to your point about having this visceral shopping experience, but you're ultimately in a virtual environment. Absolutely. One other use case, by the way, in terms of visual merchandising that this tech will help affect is we're having a discussion over breakfast this morning about point-of-purchase displays. I mean, how many of you work with, manufacturers work with the retailer, retail work with the manufacturer to see what an end cap is going to look like, and they bring a physical end cap, and so you could virtualize all of that, and then change colors and finishes, make it match the retailer's brand. So I think even the discussion between retailers and manufacturers on how you do visual merchandising will actually be impacted by this tech, which is pretty cool. More questions? We got to get the students a requirement number of questions, right?
Hi, do you think your target audience should be a consideration when you're thinking about these things too? So I know we just had someone speak about Tuesday morning and their target audience might be a little older. Considering this is 5 or 10 years away, do you think that whether or not you should be thinking about implementing something like this should also come down to your target audience and whether they'll be adopting this?
Yeah, I think that, but I do. So I live on the stupid bleeding edge on everything. So it's in my sense is that even if it's later, getting started now can be educational and you can find market opportunities. But I mean, we've been surprised. I mean, I think that at Lowe's, I mean, the age demographic does not affect at all people's interest and use of the hologram, and it's a incredibly emotional, profound experience. It's amazing how much anxiety you have about am I going to make the wrong decision? And you could just see the anxiety just fall out of people when they get to see it virtually. And so I think I think that's probably cuts across all sorts of age groups. More questions? Good. All right. Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate the opportunity.